Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel and I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel about all things migration. So today we are going to continue with our series looking at migration snapshots, where we take a very quick look specifically at migration in one specific country using the information from the European Commission's Knowledge Center on Migration and Demography's Atlas of Migration. If you're interested also in more about that data and the Atlas of Migration, you can check out my video on that. And if you're interested, of course, in other countries, you can also check out the playlist on other snapshots here. But today, I'm going to be looking at a snapshot of the Netherlands. So I have also done a whole country series on the migration history, policy, and current migration situation in the Netherlands. So if you are interested in the Dutch situation more generally, please do check out my series on the Netherlands that I have done previously. But now I'm going to look specifically at a snapshot on the Netherlands covering several different areas. So I'll be looking at the population of emigrants and immigrants in the country. I'll be looking at residence permits and visas issued, asylum applications, one specific measure of irregular migration, citizenship and naturalization in the country, some indicators of social inclusion, and education and employment. And we'll be looking at this from a really modern day situation. So we'll be looking mostly at data between 2018 and 2020. So let's jump right in and get started. So if we look specifically at the population in the Netherlands, the current population in the Netherlands is at about 17.5 million people in a relatively small country. So it is a quite densely populated country. And if we look at migrants in the country, what we can see here is that we have about 3.3% of migrants in the country today are from EU mobile migrants. So they're EU migrants, and about 3.6% of migrants are migrants from outside of the European Union. So that actually means that there is maybe around 7% of migrants in the Netherlands today, or at least in 2020. Now let's look at the flows. So I was telling you then about stocks. Let's look at flows of migrants in the Netherlands. So if we look at flows, and if you are interested in the difference between stocks and flows, you can check out a video that I have on that explaining the difference between migrant stocks and migrant flows. Now, if we look at flows of immigrants to the Netherlands in 2018, you can see that more than half of migrants to the Netherlands were actually from within the EU. So 62% of migrants in 2018 were coming from other European member states, while only 38% were coming from outside of the EU. Now, if we look at emigration, or people leaving the Netherlands, you can see here that it was about 50-50. About 51% of migrants left to go to an EU country, while 49% left to go outside of the EU. If we look also now at first residence permits issued during the year, at least in 2019, you can see that the highest number of residence permits was actually issued for family reasons. So family reunification, family formation, with about 22% for work reasons, 20% for education, and 21% for other. So the Netherlands actually, for the size of the country, has more international migrants for education purposes than many other countries. It actually really is able to punch above its weight in the international education arena, also because of good quality education and the fact that a lot of the higher education is actually given in English, which has really helped to internationalize the higher education sector in the Netherlands. If we look at also valid residence permits at the end of the year, so these are longer term residence permits, not first issued, you can see that also a larger percent now are not necessarily for work, they are for family, but also other reasons. If we also look then at Schengen visa issuance, here you can see that this has grown slightly over time from 2016 to 2019, from around 560,000 visas issued in a year to around 740,000 visas that were issued in 2019. And a Schengen visa just means that once this visa is issued in the Netherlands, people still have the possibility to travel within the Schengen area. Now let's look at asylum claims, or the first instance, first time applications of asylum in the Netherlands. And you can see also here the difference between males and females, and you can definitely see that more than 2/3 in general of asylum applications or first-time applications have been put in by men compared to women. And if we look at the decisions on that, you can also see that there's quite a high rejection rate of asylum seekers in the Netherlands, and that has really increased, especially since 2017, 18, and 19. We do see that more than half of the applications that are put in are rejected, at least in the first instance. Now let's look at one indicator of irregular migration, or people that do not have the right to stay, don't have the legal documentation to stay in the Netherlands, and what that looks like. So one indicator of this is to look at the number of people that were actually told they no longer have the right to stay in the country, compared to the number of people that actually left after that decision. And what you can see here is that the number of people that actually returned is much less than the people who have been ordered to leave across this time period from 2016 to 2019. So the difference between this shows us basically, or is one indication of the types of numbers of irregular migrants that we see in the Netherlands today. We can also look at naturalization rates, or what does that mean? Naturalization is someone who is able to gain citizenship and does gain citizenship of the country. In this case, we are looking specifically at the Netherlands. And the way that someone can gain citizenship can happen in different ways, but there's generally a residency requirement followed by tests that need to be taken and a few other things. So what you can see here is basically those who have acquired citizenship, first broken down by the difference between EU citizens and non-EU citizens. And what you can see is that it's many more EU citizens that have naturalized than non-EU citizens, which makes complete sense since EU citizens aren't really treated any differently and have very similar rights to Dutch nationals while living in the Netherlands. So for them, it doesn't make as much sense. It doesn't make as much of a difference for them to gain citizenship. So the majority of naturalization that we are seeing is from people who are not EU citizens. But even with that being said, here you can see the share of foreign citizens who have acquired citizenship in any given year. And you can see that this is also still relatively low. So anywhere between 7.5% and 5% of foreign citizens that have actually been able to naturalize in a given year. So not extremely high rates of naturalization. Now let's look at some indicators of social inclusion. So we can first look at the income of people, of Dutch nationals versus European migrants versus non-European migrants. And you can see that European migrants and Dutch nationals are very similar with regard to their income, while non-EU migrants on average have less income. If you also look at this with regard to overcrowding, so this is, many people living in a household, you can see that nationals have the lowest overcrowding rates and non-EU immigrants have the highest overcrowding rates. If we also look at risk of poverty and social exclusion, both just in general and specifically of children, we can see that non-EU nationals do have higher rates of vulnerability in this regard than nationals and then EU migrants also. Now, if we look specifically at education, here you can actually see some quite interesting statistics. So if we look at education of nationals versus European migrants versus non-EU migrants, what we see is that actually EU migrants generally have higher education levels than Dutch nationals. Non-EU immigrants have some slightly lower education than nationals, but it's actually the percentages and the breakdown is a little bit different. So while the levels of high education are actually quite similar, the levels of those who have low levels of education are actually quite different. So we do see that non-EU immigrants do have higher levels of, or more of them have low levels of education compared to European migrants and compared to Dutch nationals. Now we can also look at employment rates. So what you see here also is employment rates broken down by nationals, EU immigrants, and third country nationals, as well as by gender, so broken down by males and females. And what you do see is that with regard to employment rates, the EU nationals and Dutch nationals look quite similar, while third country nationals have lower rates of employment and higher rates of unemployment. If we also look at long-term unemployment rates, though, we do see that we see some differences here and perhaps not as big differences with regard to some areas. What's also interesting, of course, is to look at employment rates by education, because of course education plays an important role here. And as would be expected, you can see that the higher rates of education or higher levels of education are generally associated with higher rates of employment also. But you still see that there are differences here for migrants coming from outside of the EU compared to those within the EU. So we do see lower levels of employment or lower employment rates at all the different low, medium, and high levels for people who are coming from outside of the EU. Of course, this is different by different countries. If the people are coming from countries that are more developing countries versus countries that are more developed countries, and also the reasons for migration can matter a lot here too. So if someone migrated for work or education or voluntary reasons versus if someone migrated for forced reasons and is perhaps a refugee in the country, they're very different situations. So I hope this just gave you a quick snapshot of the migration situation in the Netherlands today. Again, if you're interested in seeing some of our other snapshots of other countries, you can check those out and they are linked in the description below. And also if you're interested to know more about the Netherlands, again, please do check out that full migration country series. Please, if you did like this video, please like it, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any content. Make sure to hit that notification bell and do comment down below. Are you a migrant yourself in the Netherlands or in another country? Please tell us your experiences and do feel free to ask us any questions. I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.